Do you think we're already engaged in a form of World War III?
Yeah, absolutely. I think World War III is already happening. I think World War III is not what people think it was going to be. I think people were afraid that World War III was somehow going to look like another World War II. Instead, World War III is a war of proxy nations. It's a war. It's a war where smaller third world countries are competing against each other, and they're being funded by larger countries that are actually in conflict with one another. Ukraine and Russia. U.S. is funding Ukraine. Russia is obviously taking care of itself. But the real conflict in Ukraine isn't about Ukraine. It's about the West versus Russia. The same thing's going to happen with Taiwan and China. When the time comes that China makes its biggest move on Taiwan, it's already made small moves on Taiwan. When it makes its largest move on Taiwan, it's going to become a question of China versus the West and whoever supports Taiwan.
So going back to where we started then, the average Joe. The average Joe's listening to this conversation now. What they really want is to make their life better in whatever subjective measure that they consider better to be. They want to start that business. They want to launch that project. They want to get outside of this sort of emotional prison that they live in, where their life is dominated by perception, what they think, their own sort of confines of their identity. What is the sort of closing argument and closing advice you give to that average Joe to liberate themselves so that they can pursue whatever they want to pursue?
So the most important thing is to take action. That is the most, even if it's the wrong action, if you take the wrong step, if you take the first step in the wrong direction, the difference between you and the person who doesn't take a step at all is the world. You have to take the first step. You have to take some kind of action. Just by taking action, you show that you're not trapped by fear. You show that you're willing to challenge your own perception of the world and try to gain some perspective. It doesn't matter what that action is. I don't care whether you read a book, whether you buy a program, whether you sell your first prototype. Take some kind of action, because 9 out of every 10 people are not going to take any action. You already have an advantage just by trying. And so few people understand that. They think there's some kind of advantage in waiting. There isn't. The longer you wait, all you're really doing is giving the other 9 people a chance to be the first one to take a step. If you take the first step, you beat the competition right out of the gates. And you know this as well as I do. Even if your first 3 or 4 steps are fumbles and trips and you fall on your face, by the time you stand up, you're 4 steps away from the rest of the competition. And you've learned a lot in those first 4 steps. So my suggestion is take action. Take action using the skills that we talked about today. Take action using the skills that you've talked about on some other podcast. Just take action.
Identity. We talked about how the CIA kind of rewrite your identity a little bit so that, it gives you some sort of cover. But one of the things that stops us taking action is our own identity. What have you come to learn, and what do you think now about the role of identity, how it gets in our way and how we can liberate ourselves from it?
The worst person to determine who you are is oftentimes you, because you see it all. You live in your own secret life. The rest of the world sees your public life. Even if your public life is accidental, the world sees you differently than you see yourself. So when you look at yourself, it's like looking through a magnifying glass. You see every wart, you see every crevice, you see everything wrong because you have the magnifying glass. The rest of the world, not only do they not have a magnifying glass, but they're standing 10 feet away from you. So they see something very different than what you see. So a lot of times, whatever you think about yourself is actually inaccurate when you apply it against the test of perspective. Because what other people see and what other people think of you, you are usually very wrong from what they think.
We have a closing tradition on this podcast where the last guest leaves a question for the next guest, not knowing who they're going to be leaving it for. Now, the question that's been left for you in the diary of a CEO is very, very interesting. What is something you used to strongly believe that you have fundamentally changed your mind on?
I used to believe that people could be equal. And fundamentally now, I know that people will never be equal, because equality is not really the thing that we're after. What we're secretly after that we don't want to admit to is we're always after being better, having more, being in a better position than everyone else. So we will constantly strive to take advantage of secrets, to take advantage of opportunities, to find an edge that we do not share with other people. But publicly, we will say that we wish there was more equality and that we want there to be more equality, when secretly we don't. I used to be one of those people that wanted everything to be equal. And now I am one of those people who is very happy in a world where things are not equal.
Why?
Because I see through the noise. I understand that what we want isn't what we actually say.
So these politicians that are saying, you know, maybe on the left that are saying, you know, we want equality, we want everyone to be equal, you think they're bullshitting?
Absolutely. That's not what they want.
What do they want?
What they want is more of the current status quo, which is to have conflict with the opposite side. And what they also want on top of that is to be in a position where the masses trust the politician to be in control over more aspects of the population's life.